Greetings, fellow travelers on the long, lonely road to Fresno. It is I, your humble guide, the OGGM, and today we're talking about the G in OG, and that's goblins. As you guys know, we have this Saint Jude charity stream that we're doing, called, affectionately referred to as Goldstein. Myself and several other individuals will be doing a huge mega playthrough live stream to earn money for the beloved charity Saint Jude, and I have been honored with the responsibility of taking care of the goblins in this massive undertaking. So I thought it was appropriate that we take a deep look into the goblins of the Fresno universe, the number one employees of Seth's Gears and Ammo, the backbone of my entire gaming universe, the goblins. And obviously, my goblins are not evil. I save my evil, annoying race for kobolds or rat folk, because my kobolds are modeled after the Skaven from Warhammer, and they're awful. But the goblins are silly, and as far, goblins have always been silly. Anytime I need something silly to happen, it's usually goblins. So my goblins have never been evil, and as far back as I can remember, I think I've always just sort of made them small, goofy troublemakers as opposed to malicious and evil. They're mischievous, and they're extremely curious to the point of almost self-destructiveness. Goblins just do things without thinking about it. They're very chaotic. They're also very gullible, so if you tell them to do something, they will do it. And they take great pleasure in doing things that nobody else wants to do, like cleaning out sewers, or cleaning out chimneys, or swimming to the bottom of a volcano. Goblins are happy to do that. It makes total sense in their weird, wacky worldview. Goblins don't know the meaning of the word that won't work. They'll try it. That's why there's so many weird goblin inventions, like the goblin rock sled. It was just an idea, and they tried it, and sometimes those experiments work, and sometimes they don't. But the goblins never say quit. I'm not sure they know the meaning of the word. There's a lot of words they don't know the meaning to, but if you can get them organized and all focused on a task, then you've got this great workforce who is willing to do this task for as long as you need them to do them, and never question them. They're kind of like the minions from Despicable Me, even though they predate the minions from Despicable Me. Actually, they're kind of modeled after the way the goblins were portrayed in the movie Labyrinth, and just sort of this, one goblin shooting another goblin out of a cannon, because that made sense. So we got that ridiculousness. Also, the artwork of Aaron Cornelius, his vast collection of goblin-centric art that he has done over the years, is a huge part of the personality. Good afternoon, morning, ladies, of my goblins. So let's go down the goblin pecking order from most to least important, and the difference between goblins and hobgoblins, especially in relation to this upcoming Goldstein universe thing that we're doing. And I'll have a link to the Goldstein stuff down below if you want to contribute to the charity. This is legit. It's an official charity thing. It's official on the Saint Jude page. It's not some scam. All right, so at the tippy top, we have the legendary Goblin Hobgoblin Kings. They're the largest, smartest, most powerful current hobgoblin in charge of the goblin kingdom, such as this is. They have earned the reputation through either might of battle or simply being in the right place at the right time. So then we have, that's the cheese. So there's more than one goblin king, but you rarely run into one, Then there's usually either a goblin queen or a goblin matron who is right below the Goblin King and often right behind the Goblin King, and often suspected to be the real individual in charge. So those are your two major goblins. But you're not really going to run into them. You're going to run to commanders and sub-commanders and stuff like that unless you go to the Goblin Kingdom. So for the upcoming Goldstein, we're probably not going to have the Goblin King or the Goblin Matron show up. They'll be mentioned, but they're back at the Kingdom, machinationing this whole weird Goldstein storyline. So in the Goblin military, the single most important individual is referred to as they who are allowed to talk back. Sometimes it's she who's allowed to talk back. Sometimes it's he who's allowed to talk back. But the most powerful hobgoblin commander on the battlefield, the 5-star general of the Goblin army, so to speak, is referred to as they who are allowed to talk back, because they have the very distinct responsibility, advantage/disadvantage of questioning the commands that come to them from the Goblin King and the Goblin Matron and talking back. 9 out of 10 times this ends up with the Goblin getting eaten, but occasionally they actually do produce military commandment worthy of the titles. And the title is interchangeable. Again, it's not, sometimes it is the biggest, smartest, most decorated hobgoblin commander that gets to become they who are allowed to talk back, and sometimes it's just whoever was standing there. Darth Vader rule of promotion: kill that guy standing next to him, you're now in charge. Congratulations, Admiral. We'll get to the Goblin Navy. So that's your 5-star general, they who are allowed to talk back. Then below that, you'll have your hobgoblin commanders and sub-commanders. These guys often are the ones that get to ride mounts. If you ever see like the image of a goblin riding a giant boar or a giant wolf into combat, that's usually a hobgoblin commander. They're right below they who are allowed to talk back. They're the big boys. They get 2 attacks around. They get to do also cool stuff. They have the get over here ability. That was an ability that Matt Kilville came up with for goblins that I added into my goblin repertoire. Get over here is an ability where a goblin commander can grab the nearest goblin and throw it in front of an incoming attack, so that goblin takes the damage instead of the commander. Get over here! I love that one. So yeah, they're the big boys. They're the gunnery sergeants, the stuff like that. The hobgoblin commanders riding their giant battle boar into combat, kicking ass, taking names, doing 20-30 points of damage per swing. Those are the goblins you're afraid of. Then below those, you have the hobgoblin sub-commanders. These are the hobgoblins who are stuck with the enviable job of actually, being in charge of 20 goblins and trying to wrangle the goblins together to do various things. Then below them, you'll have the various goblin troops. You'll have the goblin archers, goblin cavalry, and then your goblin foot soldiers, your typical goblins. Am I going the wrong way? Oh well, I think I took the wrong way. It should end up where we're going anyways. So right below the goblin sub-commanders, these guys will be on foot. They'll be the tallest, bravest goblins in the units. They'll have better weapons and better armor. And then we have the various goblin militia, the military. Good afternoon. How are you? The heart and soul of the goblins. So they have your goblin archers, who will be, either have the catapults or the cannons or the crossbows, and they'll be throwing the variety of goblin range weaponry. And this is where one of the areas where goblins shine is their ranged weapons, because goblins will use anything as a ranged weapon. They'll use rocks, they'll use bags of poop, they'll use dead bodies. One of my favorites that I came up with was ceramic spheres filled with rats that they shoot into combat or into an invasion. These ceramic spheres crash and the rats get out, and the rats, carry disease, so there's a chance that somebody gets bitten by these rats. But even if nothing happens, assuming the rats of course survive, when the ceramic sphere crashes, these 5-10 rats come running out, squirming around, biting people, disturbing people, just generally being annoying rats. And that's just another goofy weapon. Plus anything that they can set on fire. Another one is bees' nests. That they'll fire an entire beehive right into the middle of combat and just watch as the bees cause damage. They've got smoke bombs and things on fire and rocks, poison, and because of their size and because of their ingeniousness, goblins will use anything that they can find. They're expert scavengers, so you have as much chance of running into a goblin armed with a sword as you do running into a goblin armed with a fork, as you do running into a goblin armed with a piece of broken glass wrapped in cloth. It doesn't matter. If they found it in the trash, they can use it. And then we get into the whole weapons and armor of the goblins and how industrious they are, finding things that fit. Wow, look at these two trees. Their size, that maybe we would take it for granted. So a goblin wearing a pasta strainer as a helmet, wielding a thrown away rolling pin as a club, forks, knives, spoons, they all become weapons. Jeez, how come I've never seen these before? In the hands of goblins. And these are the things that you'll run into in the field, just hundreds of goblins armed with just a mishmash of things that could be considered weapons. And usually they're rusted, often covered in poop or food, so there's always a chance you might get sick or blood poisoning even if you survive. Their armor can be barrels, carpets, a flower pot, anything they can fit their teeny little bodies into. Often they will just load a goblin into the goblin cannon and fire that goblin. Maybe he survives, maybe he doesn't. And of course they'll have explosives, and they'll have goblins with like bombs strapped to their chest. Because goblins just are chaotic, and they don't think about that this is a bad idea in combat. They just go. Surrendering is not an option. Now goblins do have another special ability that often comes in handy. Rather than surrendering, they do this thing where they call, I just work here. So this is often when you're run into 5 goblins and you slaughter them down to 1 goblin's left. And if that goblin thinks they've got a chance to survive, what that goblin will often do is just start performing a menial task, like sweeping the floor, taking out a rag and cleaning the windows, picking up trash. Howdy. Is there no school today? It's a 3-day weekend. So then there's this last goblin, and suddenly he's squirting and cleaning the floor, and they're like, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, I just work here. So that's another thing the goblins do, and then they hope that you will believe that they just work there and not kill them. And we are almost at our destination, but there we go. So there's the goblins units that you might be running into. We'll go deeper into the various goblin armory and the goblin vehicles and the goblin mutant animals, like of course the dreaded goblin battle chicken. This looks like a Christmas tree died here, but for the most part, there you go. There are our goblin units, starting with the goblin king or queen, then the goblin matron, then we have the 5-star general, he, she who is allowed to talk back, Then you have your hobgoblin commanders on their battle wolves and battle boars. Then you have your hobgoblin sub-commanders. Then you have your goblin militia and your goblin artillery and your goblin ranged attacks, maybe your goblin cannoneers, stuff like that. You might have your goblin balloon brigade, your goblin rock sled, and of course the legendary goblin navy, where the goblins saw that everybody else were getting a navy, so they decided they wanted a navy, and they just kept throwing things into the water until they found something that floated, and that was the beginning of the goblin navy. Oh, this floats, there we go. So yeah, there's a brief overview of the many troops that will be marching to defend the Goblin Empire in the upcoming Goldstein. Check out below for links to all the Goldstein stuff, and thanks for walking with me.